Oh, and I must say is that I'm leading off the series on the Jewish concept of Malin B'Kodesh Ve'en Moriden. I'm very happy to start a series knowing that the alumni and the faculty members that I have will so surpass your initial presentation. So please God, even if there is something on TV in future weeks, you should come. Thirdly, I want to give my Hakaras Hatov on Esther and my behalf. We've been members of the shul for 10 years. We are less frequent Shabbos attenders than we'd like to be, partly because we're not that frequently in Riverdale, and partly because my knees decided that arthritis was a good thing, and we like the little Amami shul of Young Israel of North Riverdale, where nobody cares who I am, including my children. But more important than that, I just make two more comments. One is that at the present time, 3 of our 6 children live here and daven here and love being part of this community, and I appreciate that greatly. And finally, Esther and I wouldn't be living in this community if not for Mr. Lou Brovman, who kind of swindled me into the job that I have, for which on most days I'm forever grateful. But you must know that I feel closer than you might imagine, because not only am I president, which is one kind of level, but on a higher level, I am the Brovman family professor at Yeshiva University. So you know Lou longer than I do, but I know him at least as well as you do. So it's a great pleasure and honor to be here and to share some thoughts with you. I would like to say that if I'm not making sense, attribute it not to my profession, but to the fact that Esther and I are still on jet lag because we spent the last 2 weeks in South Africa, which I'll talk about a little bit. But, about the Pew Report, that's kind of like the statement that Abba Iban made when commenting on the debate in the Knesset. He said, everything has already been said, but everyone has not yet said it. And you should also know that whatever material I gave you, the Pew Report is a very long, I've been through it, is a very long, detailed research report, which is very interesting. But I guess my premise tonight is when we're done with the talk, there's fairly obvious statements that get made out of it. And I would like to start by saying that none of us should feel triumphalistic about it, because there's little reason for triumph if the Jewish people are not going to get stronger. And our children will be nothing but lonely if they have no other Jews to play with. So that's why I called this a cautionary tale. So there's a story I love, because I tell it. Several years ago, about 15 years ago, I was privileged to be the president of the Hillel Foundation, and we were in the process of opening 27 Hillels in the former Soviet Union. And we had a national conference of all the Russias in what they laughingly called a sports palace in a town called Komarova on the Baltic, outside of St. Petersburg. And there were about 500 Russian students who traveled from all across Russia. I mean, it made me feel like a piker just coming from America. Of course, it was February, because I always get the plum assignments. And at a certain point, my Russian director, Yossi Goldman, felt guilty that I wasn't doing any sightseeing. So he arranged to get a hold of a minivan, and he drove me to St. Petersburg for a little bit of sightseeing. At a certain point, he stopped at the bridge that spans the Neva River, where you could get a view of the Hermitage. Subsequently, we went back, Esther and I went back on a later trip and actually saw that there were paintings there, but at least I could get a view of it. And I went out with my camera on the snow-covered bridge, and I started taking pictures. And true story, at that point, this big guy comes approaching me, this huge guy with a big head, just a couple of teeth in his head, and a balalaika. And he starts playing Midnight in Moscow, and he looks at me and says, Amerikansky, give money. Nu, I'm a shulach, they find me everywhere. So I put my hand in my pocket, and I gave him a few ruble, and he took it, and I felt just a little uncomfortable, so I turned to Yossi Goldman over there, and I said, Yossi, lamir gain. And with that, the guy's eyes narrowed, and he looked at me diffidently, and he said, Yevrei, Jew? And I looked at him and said, Da. And his face then broke into this huge, toothless smile. And he turned to me and he said, Ich bin Ayid, started playing By Mir Bist Du Shein, right? And tried to give me back the money. Okay, this is right, a classic a classic true story. Because we were united not by Yiddish, but by what Yiddish represented. We were members of the same people in a somehow profound way. And as we start looking at the Pew Report, I have to say, what's the new Yiddish? What replaces Yiddish as a uniter and a definer of our people? And I think in that question lies the problem that we face. For so many years, we assumed that Yiddishkeit would osmose from one generation to another. The concept of das Pintele Yid, the notion that there's something. I remember I was once at a General Assembly and I was interviewing Rabbi Steinsaltz, which is not really a hard task because you get to ask the first question and then you never speak again. But he was in this secular crowd, and I asked him what he thought the answer was to the loss of so many Jews to assimilation. And he looked at me and he said, don't worry. He says, das Pintele Yid will always survive. And I had the chutzpah to say to him, that's very nice if we believe in Olam Haba, but if we believe in statistics, we know das Pintele Yid is not surviving, right, but is in fact disappearing, so try again. Okay, so he looked at me and he got this little twinkle in his eye that he tends to do, and he looked and he said, Ta'amu u'ru'u ki tov. Let them taste it, and they'll see that it's good. And I found that, frankly, a very fulfilling answer. Certainly in its meaning, its implementation might be a little bit more difficult. The recent findings in this study, which I think was largely a well-done study, although we can all come up with questions that we wish they had asked, demonstrate a new reality. That for the first time, I won't say in our history, but certainly for the first time in many generations, being Jewish is an option and not a condition. Right? It's the first time, certainly in the exilic experience, right? With some exceptions in the Enlightenment, but still it took more courage, where the outside forces are not forcing you to be Jewish. You didn't have a choice. You didn't have a choice, you were Jewish, make the best of it. Hey, when you're now in an elective society where the truth of the matter is that I don't know about most of us, but very few, I think the Pew survey says fewer than 15%, right, of Americans have ever experienced a personal act of anti-Semitism. Right? There are many Jews who are bankers today, right? I think a few of us live in Fieldston. And they'll marry us. Vatican II came along and they're willing to marry us, right? So the conditions that would keep us from the outside Jewish are gone. So it's an option. So I always ask the question, if being Jewish is an option and not a condition, why should our children exercise the option? It's a really important question. And I think this study and others show that by and large, our children are not exercising the option. They're just not. Why? Why? Okay, that was a question. So that's now, before we get to some of the figures that I handed out to you, your views are at least as valid as mine. Why do you think that our children, and I don't necessarily mean Orthodox children, but why are they not exercising the option? Yes, ma'am.
What's disturbed me for a long time is that we send our kids, and I'm not speaking obviously personally, we send our kids to college campuses all across the country as if this were the golden prize. And to be very honest, I think they're subjected, depending on the demographics, of the Jewish demographics on the campus, I think that they are surrounded with enormous pressures, many of which are anti-Semitic. They are disguised as anti-Zionist. I think that there is a lot going on the campuses that make kids ashamed of being Jewish, isolates them, and alienates them.
Comments? Yes, sir.
I think there's a positive factor that works. When these kids go to college and met in a formative period of their lives, they're meeting people and falling in love that in the past they never would have met. And they're at the stage in their life when the fact that the person they fall in love with isn't Jewish just isn't that important to them.
Ah, okay.
That's a very hard thing to overcome.
Okay. Why is that?
Can to that?
Yeah, sure.
I think that when we're speaking about university, I think it goes way back because I certainly didn't grow up, I mean, I'm in one of these generations where I didn't grow up with any Yiddishkeit. I didn't even know the word Yiddishkeit. And so for me to come back to Judaism was a very tough road. But I have to add, now that I am here, and I consider myself from more Orthodox or whatever you want to say, raising my children who are much younger, it is exorbitant, the cost of yeshiva education and private school education. And as I raise them, I see how many people who are Jewish in some ways would just kind of feel like it's just not worth all that money. And so I think it happens even before university.
A sidebar on that, it's absolutely true. Esther and I had 6 children. I've never worked in the private sector. My parents were rich in deeds, but nothing else, as were hers. And we went through mortgaging our home 3 times to do it. However, it's harder today. It's harder today.
My son is at MTA, so that's a good part.
It's one of the cheaper schools. For a little while.
Wrong science is a lot cheaper.
Yes, you get what you pay for. Look, the issue, by the way, I'm often asked to speak on the topic, the cost of being Jewish, and I refuse. And I say, because that's not the right question. Whatever the circumstances are, it's not the right question. The right question is the cost of being. No, the cost of being. Make a list of what your priorities are. What's fungible and what's not fungible, what can you get rid of and what can you not. Instead of saying the cost of being Jewish means everything else is necessary. The leased car is necessary and the vacation is necessary. And my eldest daughter tells me she remembers when going bowling was a vacation. But she hasn't wanted for anything. Right? But you can't change the whole world. But I think it's an interesting. Now, your comment was a very interesting one about what happens on campus. I don't want to speak yet. So, other comments? Yes, sir.
Well, having spent many years in chinuch in high school, and my wife certainly in the principal in various types of non-Orthodox, and my wife is in a pluralistic school, we all notice the same thing. That despite the fact that the kids go through the motions of being Jewish, they are basically interior secular. There's a very secular feel to ever since the spirituality of the 90s died out, there seems to be a movement towards secularism all over the country, all over the world.
Interesting comment.
That is infecting the students. So as soon as they get out of the high school and out of the constraints of family, then you get into that university experience. Not because of anti-Semitism. It's just they don't have it inside.
Most of the statistics show that you used to say there's nothing like some good anti-Semitism to get the Jews united. On college campuses, generally, if there's some good anti-Semitism, they'll all run for cover. Because it doesn't matter enough. Yes, ma'am.
But being secular does not negate the feeling of Jewishness.
Please, expand on that, please.
Well, I can't explain it, but I know that I'm not Orthodox, but I feel very Jewish. And not only do I feel Jewish, I feel it is a privilege to be a Jew.
Well, I think it's wonderful and it's right, and there are so many people like that that do it. The challenge, not to you, God forbid, the challenge is how many secular Jews, children of secular Jews, feel that sense of pride. And the data seems to indicate that it's harder and rarer, but for other reasons. Yes?
I think this is the generation of kids whose parents aren't survivors. And because they're not survivors, they're open to the option that the kids are taking. Meaning the kids are taking the option, I think, because the parents are okay with them taking the option, meaning not happy about it. But these are my kids, I'll support them with whatever they want to do, and that leads to them taking the option of not being, because it's accepted by the people who they respect the most.
And if you think the parents said you won't do this, all of a sudden they'll be frum?
No, not for all. There's a difference between, I think it's an issue of in the back of their minds, and I think parents underestimate the effect they have on their kids.
Underestimate. Yeah. Well, I would tell you that as someone who runs the largest Jewish institution in North America, it's by far not the most important Jewish institution. The home is. The home is. And the question of how but it's not just the home. In other words, life is more than just the home. So let's spend a few minutes looking at some of the statements. These are all statements from the Pew report that I gave to you. Could I have that last sheet that Rabbi, that I said about the Orthodox?
The graph?
What? No. Very nice. All right, I'm going to save that for last. Let's just start with the findings, and I promise you I didn't arbitrarily, but these are by no means the findings, and if you go on Pew Report on the internet, you'll get lots of different both comments on it, and you can access the full report if you want to. But these were some findings that I thought were just worth mentioning to you and talking. American Jews overwhelmingly say they are proud to be Jewish and have a strong sense of belonging to the Jewish people, according to a major new survey by the Pew Research Center. But the survey also suggests that Jewish identity is changing in America, where 1 in 5 Jews, 22%, now describe themselves as having no religion. Okay? And by the way, the study says that having no religion also embraces your definition of being a secular Jew. Okay? And you should know that there are strong movements. Felix Posen is an international supporter of the notion of secular Judaism as a legitimate pathway in Jewishness. Right? It means not know-nothing Jews, but Jews who are rich in Jewish culture and Jewish history and Jewish practice and Jewish community, just don't affiliate religiously. A fair definition, right? Number 2. Observing religious law is not central to most American Jews. Just 19% of the Jewish adults surveyed say observing Jewish law, halakha, is essential to what being Jewish means to them. It's an interesting number, 19%, because only 10% are identified as Orthodox. So more than the Orthodox population says that halacha is essential to Jewish identity, whatever they mean by halacha. Whatever they mean. And in a separate but related question, most Jews say a person can be Jewish even if that person does not believe in God. Well, you know, Pew doesn't understand that, but we believe that too. Right? Jewish is being part of the clan. It's being part of the family. It's a peoplehood. It's not a belief scheme. Let's go on. I just want to give you a broad thing, and then we can talk about it. Half of Jews, 52%. Now, the study divided the Jews by what they call Jews by religion and Jews by no religion. Jews by religion identify saying, my religion is Jewish. Jews by no religion say, I'm Jewish, but I'm not part of the religion. I'd also say what they define as Jew, right, is a Jew who has one parent who's a Jew. Jew has one parent. It's not a halachic definition. It's a Jew has one as a Jew. Half of the Jews, including 60% of Jews by religion and 24% of Jews by no religion, say they know the Hebrew alphabet, but far fewer, 13%, 16% of Jews by religion and 4% of Jews by no religion say they understand most or all of the words when they read Hebrew. Let's not look to our right or to our left or to ourselves. Just 26% of U.S. Jews say religion is very important in their lives, compared with 56% of the general public, which says that religion is important in their lives. Moreover, the study says, intermarriage rates seem to have risen substantially over the last 5 decades. Among Jewish respondents who've gotten married since 2000, nearly 6 in 10 have a non-Jewish spouse. Among those who got married in the 1980s, roughly 4 in 10 have a non-Jewish spouse. And among Jews who got married before 1970, just 17% have a non-Jewish spouse. I have to tell you, I looked at that figure and said, oh, it's slowing down. Because in the 1990 population study, the big statement was 52% intermarriage. By the way, though, when you take the Orthodox away from that number, right, 78%. 78% of Jews who are getting married to a non-Jewish spouse. It is not clear whether being intermarried tends to make U.S. Jews less religious, or whether being less religious tends to make U.S. Jews more inclined to intermarry, or some of both. Whatever the causal connection, the survey finds a strong association between secular Jews and religious intermarriage. In some ways, the association seems to be circular or reinforcing, especially when child rearing is added into the picture. Married Jews of no religion are much more likely than married Jews by religion to have non-Jewish spouses. Jews who have non-Jewish spouses are much less likely than those married to fellow Jews to be raising children as Jewish by religion, and much more likely to be raising children as partially Jewish, Jewish but not by religion, or not Jewish at all. Furthermore, Jews who are the offspring of intermarriages appear themselves to be far more likely to intermarry than Jews with two Jewish parents. Now, if any of you find this shocking, I'd be somewhat surprised. But it's equally troubling nonetheless. Let's keep going and let's look at the 2 pages I gave you of graphs, some of which repeat this, but it's always nice to look at graphs, and it made me seem like a really erudite educator. So if you look on the top of the first page, it says U.S. adult Jewish population 2013. It says 78% identify themselves as Jews by religion, 22% as Jews of no religion. I think it's a high figure. I think it doesn't mean that we should man the lifeboats. Right? I think 8 out of 10 Jews consider their religion to be Jewish. If you look at the next graph, also interesting, Jewish identity by generation. So the greatest generation, born before any of you here, 83% called themselves Jews by religion, and then it went down each generational. I'm sorry, 93. I guess I should be in that category. 93, then it goes to 86, 81, 74, and 68. I think you see here the impact of modernity, the impact of post-Vatican II, the impact of the 1960s and the 1970s, and a sense of individualism, the notion of if it feels good, do it, the notion of secular humanism as a real strain in our lives. And if you look at the next one, I found very interesting. So let me help you just explain this one. Jewish child rearing. Okay, so it says net Jewish. Net Jewish means if you include those who call themselves Jewish by religion and those who call themselves Jews of no religion. So among those who are parents or guardians of minor children in their household, right, this is the percent. If you are, let's 74% of Jews overall, 71% of people who said they were Jews by religion, and 87% of Jews who said they had no religion. And then if you look at other formal Jewish education, which I assume primarily means Talmud Torah or afternoon school or the like, right? So you will again see the similar statistics, but again in a frightening way. This is not day school, right? 38% said no to that level of education, 33% of Jews by religion, 55% of Jews not by religion. And I think, you asked the $100,000 question or the $64,000 question with that question. Let's just finish up on the last sheet and then we'll have our discussion, okay? And then I'll tell my good stories. So if you look at Jewish denominational identity over here, it's what we generally think. 35% identify as Reform, 18%, a major drop, which has them very concerned, identified as conservative, 10% as Orthodox, 6% other, and 30% no denomination. Of the 10% Orthodox, pretty much 70 to 80% of those would identify as ultra-Orthodox or Haredi. We represent about 3% of the Jewish population. To give you another figure that would be helpful, if you look in North America at the 12th grade graduates of modern Orthodox or centrist Orthodox yeshivas or day schools, that's single sex or co-ed throughout North America, there are something around 3,000 graduates. By the way, Yeshiva University gets about 650 of those 3,000. But 3,000, now understand what that means. That means in our community, 3,000 is the 1-year age cohort. Okay, our spread, and I would hope our influence, is so much larger than the numbers. We are a small people. By the way, that population is not smaller than it was. It's not a shrinking number. But modern Orthodoxy is a very peculiar enterprise because it sits, and I don't want to call it centrist, because somebody once told me that a centrist is someone who agrees with me. You know? But a modern Orthodoxy that says, be known to know the Jewish story, know Torah and know practice, and embrace ideas and intellectualism, and seek to be out in the world, is arguably the hardest kind of Judaism. Because you're always living on a tightrope, and you're always dealing with nuance, and you're always intellectually engaged in terms of what the right thing is. The only benefit of walking on a tightrope, though, is that the view from the tightrope is magnificent. And as a covenantal people, we think that's where we have to be. Generation on a tightrope. Professor Norman Adler is always very important to me because in addition to being my teacher, he always brings me the right props. So this is generation on a tightrope. We planned that beforehand, of course. That's the denomination. But here's the one that I wanted to leave you with a sad laugh, but with a laugh. What does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to be Jewish? Survey says, right? The percent saying, what percent says that this is an essential part of what being Jewish means to them? Remembering the Holocaust, 73%. Leading an ethical, moral life, 69%. Working for justice and equality, 56%. Being intellectually curious, 49%. Caring about Israel, 43%. Having a good sense of humor, 42%. Being part of a Jewish community, 28%. Beaten by having a good sense of humor. Observing Jewish law, 19%. And eating traditional Jewish foods, 14%. Now, when you look at this, by the way, when you look at these statistics on the Jews by religion, Jews by not religion, and by conservative and Orthodox, they're fun, but I don't think statistically important. Those are and there are many more findings that I commend to you, but there's enough here to talk about, I think. So my questions to you is, what do you think of this? What are the implications of it? What does it say about us? Mr. Ballin.
I want to ask whether anyone resonates to the following observation. I think that we live in a society that has a real sense of tragedy. And I don't think that Jews are tragic people. You mentioned the Holocaust and identification with the Holocaust as being the number one basis for Jewish identification. And when you said that, I thought about the fact that secular and religious Jews together, when they wanted to remember the Holocaust, chose to cite the 55th chapter of Isaiah that talks about those who feel that they will not have progeny, and therefore all hope is lost. And they are reassured that what they will have is a monument and a name, a Yad Vashem. And that puts me in mind of something that Leon Kass says about children. He says, a child is good because life is good, because being is good, because the renewal of possibility is good. A beautiful line. And I think that the culture that we live in and the European culture that we're related to, where populations are not reproducing themselves and where people are not having children, reflects a hopelessness that is inconsistent with Jewish culture in so many and manifest forms. And without belaboring the point, because I think you could adduce examples from Messianism to Philip Roth in support of the view that, to Woody Allen, that there is something, hope, that to us tragedy is a joke because we're that optimistic. Is there something about a culture whose most popular television show is Breaking Bad, about drug addiction? Is there something about a culture that with shrinking populations in every group that is inimical to the fostering of Jewish values across denominations, and is the real problem that we haven't met the tragic tone of the times in our society with the essential Jewish belief that when God created Kitov, and the sense of the goodness, of being the goodness of life, is there something as big as that at stake?
Yes. Let me respond. I mean,
The big idea.
I think the big idea is that we were good with tragic cultures when it was ours, and therefore it was just our job to survive. Right now, the tragedy of the culture is that you either confront really harsh realities of life without any path toward resolving them, or you say the hell with it, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, like Apikoros said, or go into a fundamentalist sect where you don't have to think about anything. And I think if you look at the indicia of, quote, happiness among young Americans, it's not there. I think you're exactly right. On the other hand, choosing our way of life is counterintuitive. You can say it'll make you happy, but it means I don't get to do whatever I want to do. It means this whole world is for me, but I can't get to it. Can I share a story from 2 weeks ago that Esther and I shared? So we were in South Africa, as I said, and we went to Kruger National Park, which is larger than New Jersey, and certainly, I guess, more of a garden state than New Jersey. And it's not like Six Flags. It's not like an animal park. It is a natural habitat. I mean, the food isn't provided by man, and the grounds aren't tilled, and there's no landscaping to keep at. You're really out in what they would say is the veld. You're out in the forest. It's not even forest. It's just the land. And we went out in a covered vehicle at 5:30 in the morning. What you're supposed to do is you go in the morning and you go in the evening. In the afternoon, many of the animals are asleep. And it's spring in South Africa, so everyone has babies. And we saw, and you know, they're not there, here are the antelopes and here are this. You just drive along, and if you're lucky, you'll see them. And we saw giraffe, and we saw elephants with their infants, and we saw many, many impala waiting to be eaten by lions, and we saw rhinoceri and hippopotamuses, and we saw. I seem to establish a real closeness with a hyena because he identified with me, and I forget what other animals, Esther. Esther, what other animals? We saw a python busily eating something.
Donors?
What's that? Donors? No live ones. So, but here was what was remarkable about this to me. I was stunned by it, because what did these animals all do? They copulated. They ate. Elephants eat 22 hours a day. They ate. They hung around. They grazed. They either served as predators eating other animals or protected themselves from being attacked by predators. And a gloom came upon me, and I said, we are in the first 5 days of creation. We are at a time where Bereshit bara Elokim, the God of natural law, who built the circle of life, the relentless and unforgiving rules of life, the survival of the fittest. And I was watching this, and of course there was something majestic in it, but there was something terrifying. Because if that's all that there is, and frankly, when you get to day 6, if we're just at the top of the food chain, then what is this life about? Now, I'm not suggesting that the elephants weren't talking about meaning or politics or whether their government was open or not, but I think they weren't. And I looked and I said, it was only day 6, the first time, by the way, after man's created, is the first time that the Torah talks about Hashem Elokim. Hashem, the God of Rahmanut, of mother love. Right? And the notion of a world devoid of that sense of godliness and of a human devoid of that sense of both Midat Hadin and Midat Hateva, then the world would be hopeless. right? And the challenge for man is, are we Adam 1, Adam 2, or a combination of them? Are we simply the highest animal in the food chain? Or are we created b'tselem Elokim, and are we supposed to live a life of purpose? I can't tell you how many different audiences in South Africa I bored with what I just bored you with. But it's something of an answer to your question. I think people don't want to, certainly young people, and I'm a better expert than you are, young people want a life that matters. They don't just want to be in the food chain. Dean.
Mr. President.
Your deanship.
I haven't been planted here to make you look good. You look good already. Anyway, you've built Hillel. You've been leader of YU, the Center for the Jewish Future. You've put in place many things that have contributed to the raising of Jews. Based on this report and the trends you're seeing, what programs might you imagine for the next 10 years? Or budgets? I mean, how would you attack it? I guess that's the question, or how would you deal with it? Is there some model you have in mind or some way?
Thank you so much for asking me that. What's your next job, Fred? You know, the dean comes and he gives me a book that's a visual aid, and you play Stump the Stars. It's very nice.
I'll talk to Mr. Brown.
It's, uh-oh.
Social and education, the two biggest variables.
Social and education are the two biggest variables. I'll tell you the answer.
I'm sorry, Mr. Brown.
Especially since I agree with him. Look, I don't know what we get to fix, and I don't know how we fix it all, and I don't know, and I do know this, our job, how pretentious it is if we think our job is to make everyone frum like us. Okay, what a ridiculous statement. On the other hand, if being Jewish is an option and not a condition, and you have to ask the question of why our children will exercise the option. In clearly modern terms, they're going to exercise the option if it gives them added value in building a life that makes sense. And the issue I think that we have is that you and I know that Jewishness adds incredible texture and purpose and meaning to life, but the children don't know that. Because it doesn't osmose. For a few generations, we fooled ourselves that anti-Semitism and Hitler killed 1 out of 3 of us, and poor little Israel is a flower blossoming in the desert, and the smells of Eastern Europe and 170th Street in the Bronx, and Bubba and Zeta would of course transmit to our children. But our memories are their history, and nobody gets passionate about history. So we have never been and can never be sustained as an ignorant people. And if the only thing that people have is that, now, if someone is a proud secular Jew, has a rich and full secular home, immerses their children in that secular Jewishness, they're religious. Whatever they think of God. I have a hard time, I don't know why I wouldn't have pork if I didn't believe in God. Frankly, never mind pork, lobster, for sure lobster, right? But I accept that. The problem is when you make it simply cultural, it's one culture among many, and it's just another choice. I will also say, and I could never resolve this in Hillel, and it wasn't my job to resolve it, I don't understand how you maintain Jewishness in a world that's completely elective. If there are not some non-negotiables, if there are not boundaries, what transmits? What? And I can't answer that, and I talk to my Reform and conservative colleagues, and they agree with that. They just don't know where it takes them because there are other forces at work from them. I mean, it's very interesting in South Africa. Everyone in South Africa, most people in South Africa are Orthodox, which means they drive to an Orthodox shul on Shabbos. Okay, and by the way, I happen to like that. Let them know that this is always their home. But they've been, and they send 85% of their children to Jewish day school. The majority go to, I guess, what we would call a community school, where they learn 1 hour of Limudei Kodesh a week. A week, and they think they're protected from assimilation. Now, they're still living in a somewhat besieged environment, but assimilation. The Frum School has 2 hours a day. And of course, it's a reekingly Jewish Litvische community. And the Yiddish is still spoken, and it's very warm. But I kind of came like the angel of death to say, you're behind us, but you're heading in the same direction. I don't want to monopolize. Someone had raised their hand. Yes, sir.
Oh, they're not Galicianos.
They're not Galicianas, Baruch Hashem. Yes.
I was in Minneapolis for 4 years at the end of the 60s. And Minneapolis was an extremely strong conservative city. They were original back in the 50s. They had a Talmud Torah that ran not only on Sunday, but before another 4 days during the week. And they were very proud of their conservative heritage. And the Orthodox was sort of backward, sort of local Amish, you know. It was the local version of Amish. And when I was there in the late 60s, they were down to maybe Sunday plus one afternoon. They were down to Sunday plus one afternoon. But the key was, there were no more maskilim left. When in those days, if a kid wanted to go to JTS, he had to enter, especially into the rabbinic program, he had to prepare 50 blot of Gemara. They ended up coming to, I taught a bunch of kids Gemara for a while. They would come to me. In the summer, they'd go to Camp Ramah, they'd pick up the extra. But they ended up coming to a person in the Orthodox community. There is no survey that could have ever picked that up. But I already knew, whether I appreciated the parameters, I knew that they were hollowed out already.
Yeah.
Because this was the pride. They were the Talmud Torah that won all the Chidot in English all the years.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
And you could see, and the statistics couldn't pick it up. It's a question, it really goes back to the original remarks about house by house. And that goes to the question of the tuition, because if both parents are working, the house has a very tough time being a complement to the school.
Yeah, and the issue goes further, because they finish high school and they've spent $250,000 on tuition, and I come and say, why'd you spend all that money if you want them now to learn college-level political science but not college-level Torah, and not be in the largest community of guys and girls who will share lifelong values together? And they say, but Queens College is really cheap. And, you know, and we do everything in our power. But in the meantime, we've given over 50% tuition, and I'm looking at no cash. So it's a problem for all of us, and we all have to look for savings, and we have to look for efficiencies, but not cheapen Torah. The problem we have, you see, is the education that we give is very expensive, but we don't charge as much as Horace Mann does. And the reason we don't is because it's not only people who afford Horace Mann who we're appealing to. We're saying every Jew has to have a Jewish education. And it's a big challenge. But we also forget that it doesn't stop. And someone made a comment about college before and the environment of college. I spent 15 years on campuses with Hillel, but mostly for the 90% of Jews who weren't Orthodox. And for me it was, if a kid would leave college saying, you know, this Jew thing really means something to me, then we won. We started Birthright, not to have them love Israel, but to take them to the Jews' Disneyland and give them permission to own their Jewish story. And I think it's very important. But if they don't, I don't know what they have. And college is completely counterintuitive to an orthodoxy or even to a religion. It's about the individual. It's about every choice is a good one. It's anti any orthodoxy. It's saying a value is just a value, but other people have their values, and maybe that's good. And it's a great time for all kinds of experimentation. And that might be healthy in some context, but in the context of a Jewish peoplehood, it doesn't work. So you have Hillel houses and Chabad and different programs, hopefully which don't just create a retreat center, but put little strips of Velcro, around Jewish Velcro around campus so that something happens. But if by the time they come to campus, they don't have a very strong Jewish identity based on home, based on education, based on community, based on camp, right? It's kind of verfallen until at some point they can refine it. There was a, Barry, you want to say something?
Yeah. So just what you mentioned now, home, education, community, camp, we're very good at that. They're not, right? Not by far. I would say I wouldn't say the overwhelming majority of modern and ultra-Orthodox Jews think this way, but I think a very good percentage look at this and say, this isn't really my problem. It's my community came out okay. Right now, the other communities haven't, but you know what? I've been telling them that for 20, 30, 40 years. This is where you're headed. They ignored us, they laughed at us, right? They changed the rules midway to boost their numbers.
But unless we're a little sect and content to be smaller than the Amish, and unless we think we're God and we're judging people and writing them off, we cannot give up on the Jewish people. And that doesn't necessarily mean trying to get them to be frum. I mean, the way I look at it, Professor Adler wrote down that what he sees from this is both social and education. I think if there are two things that are critical, and then, by the way, with our community, while we're busy being so proud of ourselves, the passion is missing from our educations. Right? So there is fall off. Why not go to Lehigh? Because I did my dual curriculum already. Okay, we haven't figured that out yet. And we have a responsibility that our homes have to be filled with passion and our schools have to be. It's a Jewish school, not a dual curricular school. We have work to do. And we have work to do in our homes. I tell you a quick story, and I'll tell you one other quick story, but before that other quick story, I'll take all your comments. I always take questions when I speak someplace, and someone raised their hand and said, President Joel, is it true that students cheat at Yeshiva University? So I said, look, Rachmana litzlan, it's true that students cheat at Yeshiva University. I will tell you all of our studies show that fewer students cheat at Yeshiva than at other schools, but they cheat at Yeshiva. And we've been working with the faculty, and we're working on having more proctors, and I've enunciated a zero tolerance policy, and we've even publicly expelled people, but they cheat. I said, but I have something else to tell you. These students did not come to us directly from the womb. They spent 18 years with you. So here's the question I want to ask you. What do you talk about at the Shabbos table? Do you talk about money? Do you talk about winning? Do you talk about people who aren't at the Shabbos table? Do you talk about honor and honesty and Torah or valuable things? And we started a product that we have every 5 weeks. You should download it, called Conversations at the Shabbos Table, which just presents kind of ethical dilemmas and how you can work it through. But I think it's all about knowing the story, being passionate about it, and being in a community. How do you dance around the Shabbos table by yourself? Okay, so I don't care if what they're learning is the 10 Commandments or the 10 Suggestions. Okay, I want them to know there's 10 something. So the story is, it must be 15 years ago, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, speaking to a community group of about 500 people, one of these normative Jewish identity conversations. And one of the shtick that I did, that I'm sure I stole from someone else, is in the middle of the conversation I said, ladies and gentlemen, how many people in this room can tell me the name of Jesus' mother? And hands went up, a lot of hands went up. I said, fine. I said, how many people in this room can tell me the name of Moses' mother? And all of a sudden, a nodding thing, and I went on with the speech. At the end of the speech, someone comes over and says, Mr. Joel, how do you do? My name is Schindler. I'm originally from Brooklyn. I said, hi, I'm Joel, originally from Yonkers. He said, you are terrific. I agree with everything you say. I just need to tell you something. I'm different than the rest of them. I said, you are? He says, yeah. I know her name. I said, you do? And he smiles and says, it's Yoshabel. No, it's Yocheved. But the poor guy told that to one of the few idiot savants who knew the only place where Moshe's mother's name is mistranslated as Yoshabel. Anyone know? Cecil B. DeMille's The 10 Commandments. He saw the movie, he didn't read the book. Okay? It's a joke, but it's something to remember. If we don't teach our children our story, and if we don't celebrate it with them, as Norman would say, if we don't give them education and give them a resonant community, what's going to transmit? Our memories are their history. So if we think it's valuable, then we support all of that, but I would say, remind them that they're not alone or they'll be alone. So a few more comments, if we might. Yes, sir.
Excuse me.
Yes.
At least he goes to movies.
At least he goes to movies.
No, I hate to sound like I'm venting tonight, but you've given me a fabulous opportunity.
Be my guest.
I'd like to go to the issue of child rearing. And while I'm certainly at the grandmotherly stage and don't have any particular personal gripes, although I'm sure you can find a few, I challenge just about everybody who's sitting here tonight to think about what's going on with our kids here in the shul. How many kids do not sit with their parents? How many kids, when you talk to them, either walk away or have a snotty comment? How many kids don't have the faintest idea what they're doing here? How many parents don't have the faintest idea why they're bringing their children here? I can't begin to tell you that sometimes it feels like it's a physical contact sport to come to shul on a Shabbos morning where parents bring their kids. I believe the children belong here. I believe the children belong with their parents. I believe that we have an obligation to other people's children, like the other people's children have an obligation to us. This is a community, and we don't raise our kids as if it's a community. We raise them as if it's an individualist proposition, and we're getting the result.
I'm not showing any political affiliation, but it does take a village. We call those kids in our shul the orphans.
But there are too many of them.
So we all, look, you know what? The other thing is nobody's perfect here. We all have to remind ourselves as to what we are, right? And we have leaders and rabbis and others and educators, and you should send them all to Yeshiva University because they all come out perfect from there. Mr. President.
Yeah, so Mrs. Jesselson raises a good point in a more global sense, and that is that it would seem that with all the pressures of the teenage years, throwing the bigger responsibility before college campuses and the like at the high school educators at the high school level seems to be misguided, right? It would seem that the elementary education, or the Girsa Diankuta, what you learn when you're young, should be having the most impact on these statistics. And the question is, how much is being done from your vantage point now and from what you know globally with the day schools from very early on, to make sure that these lessons are...
There are multiple currents going on at the day schools because we are dealing with the issue of affordability, and therefore you have all these new models, which I welcome because none of them are going to work, but from all of them, there will be the next step in Jewish education. I think what you are seeing is a tremendous upsurge in what we'll call modern Orthodox educators at all levels, substituting for a generation of Haredi educators who are the only ones who would work for as little money as we were paying them to be in the schools. And we have to decide if we want to offer our children, who now the best and the brightest want to go into Jewish education, are we going to offer them not fame and fortune, but dignity and a capacity to earn a living? That's our challenge, and it's juxtaposed with the other. I think, from my perspective, and I'm a lawyer, so what do I know? The elementary grades are very important for the teaching of basic skills, for the love of customs and ceremonies, for the celebration of Yiddishkeit. I think the high school years have to be where it comes together and where they feel it makes some sense, and frankly, where we have to push them to think about their lives, because they're working very hard not to. They're multitasking. And I have to tell you that I think that post-Israel, where most of them go, and some of them think about their lives and some of them don't, when they come back, again, I'm not going to give an ad for Yeshiva University, the environment they go to is so critical. It's so critical because it's who are their best friends, who am I learning from, what do I want to be? What do I want to be? Not lawyer, doctor, Indian chief. What kind of a person do I want to be? And then it gets right back to what you say. What's the home? What are my parents like? What do I want to be that emulates them?
I want to take up one of the comments you made about 3,000 students being each year our population. One of the things that's intrigued me over the years is we're now about the, as best I can tell, the third or fourth attempt at modern Orthodoxy through history. Never has it succeeded. And it hasn't succeeded because it hasn't really reproduced itself in terms of leadership. And we can go back to Frankfurt, you can go back through all of it.
As opposed to the Haredi world, which is filled with leadership these days.
That's correct. Filled with self-made leadership, but nevertheless leadership. We have never been able to reproduce leadership. We haven't been able to reproduce the Rav as a classic
The
example.
Rev is a millennial figure.
I understand.
I mean, I'm sorry. You look at some of the students that you know well because you've helped educate them, and you look at how delicious they are and how they're going to build communities.
But who is going to get up and get the respect of everybody?
Well, nobody. No, did Moshe? Did Moshe?
Yeah, but if you-
I mean, come on. And I have to tell you something else. You're right. We're living in very complicated times, right? Where every minute, now I'm going to be personal, every minute, someone will tell you something you're doing wrong. Where we play a national game of gotcha. Where the news cycle, the blogosphere, which is hateful and doesn't have to have either journalistic standards or your names, or our own, let's remember, the first blogs were the Shabbos tables, where we really like nothing better but to say, now we're very powerful. We can say what everybody else is doing wrong. If I have one thing at Yeshiva University that I tell students again and again, is I plead with them to be skeptical and I beg them not to be cynical. Oscar Wilde said a cynic is someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And we've created a cynical community, but I do think we have kids who are deeply learned in Torah, who will leave New York, please God, and go to not New York, where they can sustain communities, but they're not going to be huge. I've kept you late, so let's do two more questions. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to get back to the Jew study for a minute.
Yes.
About the 80+% of other Jews out there. To me, programmatically, these statistics point to the centrality of Jewish marriage for sustaining Jews in America, and maybe we should all try to get other Jews married to other Jews.
I think it's very...
Isn't maybe all that hard?
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Brofman. Oh, yeah, the question was, it seems to her that looking at the figures, the most important determinant is if you're married to a Jewish spouse, and you're most likely, if you're married to a Jewish spouse, to raise Jewish children. So shouldn't we be working, like we do at Yeshiva University with YU Connects, to get people married? So my only answer to you is it's a little bit like a cat chasing its tail. Okay, I will tell you, right, that if Jewishness doesn't mean something to you, why shouldn't you marry a non-Jew unless you're racist? And we haven't raised our children to be racist. If the Jewish story does not have meaning, right? If the Jewish story does not have meaning, and I thought you were going to go somewhere else. I thought you were going to talk about the centrality of Jewish preschools, which I was going to agree with you about. But if they don't know their story and own their story, it doesn't matter who you fix them up with. They're not going to go running off to non-Jews. I don't think most Jews have said, boy, do I want to be Jewish? Nah, she's blonde and blue-eyed, I'm going over there. I just think it doesn't figure. They are no longer, many of them are no longer American Jews, they're Jewish Americans. And therefore it's one more checklist in their identity. I don't despair, first of all, because our community is more strong and more learned than it's ever been, and it's never been the numbers. I would tell you that other communities in the world are looking to say, small little communities, right? Australia and South Africa and England and Brazil are looking to say, aside from feeding children to Israel, what's the valuableness of our life that we need in the Golah? I will tell you that Israel is struggling, but since it's in an existential threat situation and there aren't a lot of others to marry, they're in a stronger situation. There are lots of other ways they're in a stronger situation, but it certainly is not the dream fulfilled yet. It's still a work in progress, and there are real issues in terms of identity and assimilation. But I really am optimistic, because I think we're not going away. I don't believe in all these experimental Judaisms. I don't believe in all the split-offs and all these little chaburot. I think they're very nice, but I don't think they're going to linger. But I think we are a people who always experiment and always push the envelope. But as long as we do it holistically, I mean, I really want, my friend David Ellenson, who's stepping down as the president of Hebrew Union College, which is the Reform Seminary, tells me with despair that they've become an outreach movement, that primarily they're dealing with intermarrieds. And he said he thought things were fine until he got attacked at a meeting shortly before he retired by a student who gave a speech in a large crowd attacking what he says is one of the last standards that they have at Hebrew Union College, which is they will not admit an intermarried student into their rabbinical seminary. And he's been widely attacked for that, because after all, Reform Judaism is all about openness and all about accepting this. How could you not do that? And he says, I guarantee you that when I step down, one of the first things the Board of Trustees is going to do is get rid of that. That's not because they're evil. That's because they are faced with this enormous conundrum between Jewish tradition and the elevation of liberal philosophy. And they have to say that if the two of them are in clash, at least in my humble opinion, liberal philosophy has to trump. And I think that's their challenge. I think our challenge, right, is how do we have students, young children who know their story, who love their story, who own their story, and who want to be part of a community that's celebratory. And I really am mindful of okay, so we have 1, 2, 3. You've been waiting. Well, let's go you first. You were up longer.
This is another in the statistics category. It seemed to me, and I can't sort of find it now, but it seemed to me that twice as many non-Jews as Jews identify with a religion. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And yet, when it came to intermarriage, more children are being raised Jewish in these intermarried families than...
No, that's not true.
You don't...
20% of the children in intermarriages are raised Jewish. 20%. That means 80% are not, whether they're raised Christian or whether they're raised with no religion.
I thought I was higher.
No.
But then also just
Yeah.
quickly, but I mean, obviously I don't want to be expecting too much from one population. However, when the teacher is really excited about what he or she is teaching, this is extremely infectious.
I think you never give up on a Jew. I think you never give up on a Jew. I ran Hillel. I can't tell you the people who'd come into the Hillel house who told me that they never knew they were Jewish until last week. And what does it mean? I think you never give up on a Jew. But I'm going to be really strict. Just the people who had their hands raised, please. Sir.
Let me add something optimistic.
I wasn't optimistic.
I'm a lawyer. I also coach the YU debate team.
I'm a retired lawyer, and I'm the president of Yeshiva University.
About 5 or 6 times a year, I take about 20 YU students, about half from Stern, half from Yeshiva College, to debate tournaments. And I spend Sunday with them, partly debating, but also in between the rounds, hearing them talk, watching them. And I must say, you'd be proud if you saw them and heard them.
Yeah, that's what keeps me going. It's not the kavod, I promise. Rabbi Herskowitz, yours is the last.
There's one element that I think doesn't get emphasized enough. You mentioned it a few minutes ago, but it wasn't pushed that much. And that education is very good. Knowledge is wonderful, but spirit is more important. And I think one of the problems is that a lot of us practice our Judaism, but we don't have a spirit that infects the kids. And kids get more fooled, they get fooled into something more by spirit than by knowledge. I don't know.
I would tell you that there comes a time when the spirit runs out if you don't have the fuel of knowledge.
Yep.
And I would also tell you that right now, for example, we have more and more Lubavitcher kids coming to yeshiva. Right? Because Lubavitch have all the spirit. They have all the spirit, and they have knowledge. I'm not trying to put them down. But they recognize that an education can make them fuller. So it's not that hard. We invest in our kids in the right way. The Pew Report is certainly worth reading, but the message is, love your kids, build a strong home, give them a strong education, and have them hang around other great Jews, and we're going to keep going on. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure. Thank you very, very much.